What's going on, everyone? This is part 6 in a series of tutorials that walks you through the process of creating a Revit structural template. In the previous tutorials, I've covered a few topics like setting up the template units, creating line styles, configuring font styles, and other topics. If you haven't checked those tutorials out, check out the links in the description below. In this tutorial, I'll be configuring my linear dimension styles in the template file. Here I have opened the Revit template file I've been working on, and I am in the drafting view where I've been placing the styles I've created. I've mentioned in previous tutorials that my goal in creating these Revit styles is to have them be identical or close to identical to my AutoCAD styles. Let me pull up a screenshot of my AutoCAD styles so I can get an idea of what I want my linear dimension style in Revit to look like. If I focus on the linear dimension style here, I can see that the line weight is green, which is a pen weight of 3. The font style for the linear dimension matches the font style for my general text. The extension line goes beyond the witness line. This is the extension line right here. This is the witness line. Tick is a diagonal mark, and the witness line extends past the dimension line. So here's the witness line, and it extends past this dimension line. I now have an idea of what I want my linear dimension style to look like. So let's go back into Revit and get started. So I'm going to go to the Annotate tab here on the menu and select Aligned. Now, if I click on this style dropdown, I see that there are a bunch of linear dimension styles already created. Now, these linear dimension styles were created by default because we selected the default structural template as a starting point when we created this template file. I'm going to use one of these default linear dimension styles as a starting point for my linear dimension. So I'm selecting a default linear dimension style, and then I'm going to drop a couple of dimensions here, so I could see the modifications that I'm doing when I am modifying the styles. Now I'm going to select the dimension string that I dropped in here, and I'm going to select Edit Type, and I'm going to duplicate this default linear dimension style. So I'm clicking Duplicate, and I'm going to name this whatever I want. So I'm going to call this TDG Linear Dimension. And I'm going to click OK and click OK here. So the first setting options I am going to address is under the text group here in the options. In a previous tutorial, I set up my font styles, and unfortunately Revit doesn't have the option to use the font styles that I created previously. So I'm going to have to recreate those font styles here so that my font is consistent throughout my Revit styles. So this first option here is the width factor, and I recall my font style settings, and my width factor was 0.8. The underline option was left unchecked. The italic option was also left unchecked, as well as the bold option was unchecked. The text size, I had it set to 3/32 of an inch, so I don't need to make a change here. The text offset, now this is specific to the linear dimension style. It wasn't established in the font styles that I set up. Now what this 1/16 of an inch value is this gap here between the bottom of the text or font to this dimension line here. If you want to change this for whatever reason, say you want to have it as 1/4 of an inch there, you would change it. So I'm good with 1/16 of an inch. The next option is the read convention, and we have a few options here. We have horizontal, which will rotate your text to always be horizontal. The default option is up then left, which we've already seen that. And then there's up then right. I'll flip that. We also have left then up. Now here this looks similar to the up then left. The final option we have here is right then up, and it's similar to this up then right. I'm going to stick with the up then left option. The next setting we have here is the text font, and I have my font style set to ARCHI TXT, so I'm just going to select that, select apply. The next option we have is the text background option. Now we have two options here. There is opaque and transparent. Right now it's set to opaque, and let me show you what opaque is. I'm going to draw a line here right across the font, and let me change this to a solid line. Right now it's set to center. So I have that set, and let me actually make this a bold line so we can really see what's going on here. So here you see this bold line that I just drew right across the font of this dimension style. And you could see that the font is masking out that graphic behind it. Now, if I were to change this option here, this background, to transparent, you'll see what happens when I click apply. Now there is no mask as a background for this font, so this all just bleeds together. I prefer to have the opaque option, so I'm going to select that and click apply, okay, and I'm going to delete that out. The next option we have here is unit format, and if I click this dialog box pops up. And in a previous tutorial, I set up the units for this template by having this checkbox checked to use the project settings. It's using those settings I've already established. If for whatever reason you want to have these linear dimension style have different unit settings, you would uncheck this and you would make your modifications here. You could set this to whatever you'd like, change the precision, say you want to show the 0 feet here, click OK and click apply, and here you see that the 0 feet is no longer suppressed. I like to use the units I've created for the template, so I'm just going to have this option selected and click OK and apply. Alright, so the next setting option we have here is alternate units. Now there's a few options here. There's none, right, and below. I don't use alternate units, so my setting is always set to none. But if you use alternate units and say you want to display it below your primary units, you would select below, and here your alternate units would show up. Now this is showing it in millimeters because the alternate units format is set to millimeters. If you need a different type of unit to show, you would just click that and your alternate unit settings would show up here, and then you could select your unit types, your rounding, and all your other options. So same if you set it to right, it would place the alternate unit value to the right of your primary unit value. So I'm going to have this set to below for now, just so I could explain these other two options here. The next option is alternate unit prefix, and this is if you want to have some text or some symbology before your alternate unit value. So here I'm just going to put some text for presentation purposes, if I could spell it, and I'm going to hit apply, and you could see that the text was added before the alternate unit value. You could also see that no space was automatically added between the text and the alternate unit value. If you want a space between the two, you have to manually add it here, and when I click apply, you see the space is added. And the next option is the alternate unit suffix. So this is if you want the symbology or some text after the alternate unit value. So here I'm going to put mm for millimeters and click apply, and you could see that right after the value, the mm is added. Again, no space is automatically added. If you want to have a space there, you have to manually place one. When I click apply, you could see the space is added. So I'm going to clear these settings out because I don't use it, and I'm going to set that to none. And there I have my linear dimension style back to how I want it to look for now. Alright, the next setting option I'm going to look at here is the show opening height. So right now it's unchecked, and to show you exactly what this does, I need to go into a plan view and draw a wall. So I'm going to go to my level 1 here in the template. I'm going to draw a structural wall. I'm going to draw that there, and I am going to drop a door opening in this wall. So I have a door opening selected of 36 inches by 84 inches, and I'm going to drop that in there, and I'm going to drop a dimension string. I'm going to make sure that it is on the linear dimension style that I created. So right now you could see that it's only showing the width of this door opening, 36 inches equals 3 feet. So I'm going to go back into the linear dimension style settings and go back to this show opening height option. Right now it's unchecked, but if I were to check this, click apply and click OK just to hide this dialog box, now you see that there is an additional dimension shown below the upper dimension. So this dimension here is showing the width of the opening, and this lower dimension here is showing the height of the opening, thus the option being labeled as show opening height. Now I don't use this option, so I'm going to leave that unchecked. going to delete that stuff and go back to my drafting view. Now that option doesn't affect these dimensions here because there's not an opening being detected. This is just line work that is detecting. This option only works for model dimensions. Alright, so the final option here under this text group is the suppress spaces option. And right now it's unchecked. So if I were to check this and hit apply, you see nothing really happens here graphically. To show you what really is going on here, I'm going to modify this dimension value, and I'm modifying it just by double clicking the dimension value, and I'm going to add a suffix value of some space text. I'm going to click apply. Now you can see now the value is 6 inches, no space, some space text. Going back to this suppress spaces option, if I were to uncheck that, click apply, you see that the value is now 6 inches, space, some space text. Click it again, hit apply. You can see that it suppressed the automatic space in between the 6 inches and the some space text value. You notice that it did not suppress the space that we put in between some and text. This suppress spaces option is only for automatic spaces. It does not suppress any manual spaces that are put in. I don't use this option. I have this option unchecked, so that's what I'm going to do there. Hit apply, and I'm going to reset this value back to just the actual value. Now I'm going to move on to the graphics group here, and the first setting option is the dimension string type. Now there are a few options here. There is continuous, baseline, and ordinate. If I select baseline and I click apply, it changes the dimension string type to a baseline string type. If I change this to ordinate, it changes it to ordinate. When I select these two other options like ordinate and like I have selected here, this other text group that was available disappears, and as well as some of the other settings in this graphics group. If I change this to baseline, some of those settings got added back to this graphic group, but some of them were brought back and grayed out. If I change this to continuous, here we see that the other group is now available, and these setting options here under the graphics group are now available for modification. I'm going to stick with this continuous dimension string type because that is going to get me as close as possible to my AutoCAD styles. So I'm going to click apply. The next setting option that I'm going to look at here is leader type. And there are two options here. There is arc and line. Right now it's set to arc, and you can't really see anything here because the text is still at its origin point. Now if I were to pull this text away from its origin point, you'll see a leader gets automatically added, and it's the arc type of leader. Now if I go back into my settings here, look at the leader type and change this to line, click apply, it changes the leader type to a line type of leader. Now when I select this line option, another settings option appears here, and it's called shoulder length, and it's set to 0. If I were to change this to 1/8 of an inch and click apply, this leader now bends and has a shoulder that is 1/8 of an inch long right there. The next option here is leader tick mark, and right now it's currently set to none. If I click in this value area, this little drop down becomes available, and these are tick mark options available in Revit. Currently you can't specify a custom tick mark, so you only have what's available through Revit. If I were to select arrow filled 20 degree as my tick mark and click apply, you can see here that the tick mark is now added to this leader on this dimension style. I prefer to have mine set to none, so I'm just going to select none and click apply to apply it to this dimension style. The next option here is show leader when text moves. And there's two options. There is away from origin and beyond witness lines. So right now it's set to away from origin, and what that means, as soon as this text gets pulled away from its origin point, a leader gets added automatically. If I were to change this to beyond witness lines and click apply, you see nothing happens here, and let me show you why. The text is outside of the witness line, so a leader is being added automatically automatically. Now, if this text were to fall between the witness lines like here, no leader gets added. So you could pull this text as far away or as close as possible to the origin point and no leader gets added until you pull it away outside of the witness line. So see here, I'm outside of this witness line, leader added, no leader, leader added, no leader. I prefer to use the option of away from origin. So I'm going to select that and click apply to apply it. The next option I have here is Tickmark, and right now it's set to arrow filled 20 degree. And if I select this value area, this drop down pops up and I could select options available from Revit. My AutoCAD style has a diagonal tick mark, so I'm going to select a diagonal 3/32 for this option. I'm going to click apply and see here my diagonal tick marks appear. Now this isn't quite matching my AutoCAD styles, but I'm going to keep working on this with these other options to get it there. All right, the next option is line weight, and my AutoCAD styles has a line weight of 3, so I'm going to set that option here to 3. This line weight is only for the leader, the witness lines, and the dimension line here. It is not for the tick mark. Setting that to 3 and clicking apply to apply it to the styles. The next option up is tick mark line weight. The tick mark on my AutoCAD styles is pretty thick, so the heaviest line weight I have available is 6, so I'm going to set this line weight to 6. So I'm going to click apply, and you can see it bolds up a bit. And it's looking pretty close to the AutoCAD styles that I have going on. Moving on to the next option, I have dimension line extension. Right now it's set to 0. The dimension line extension is this dimension line extending past this witness line right here and right here. In my AutoCAD style, I have this set to 3/32, so I'm going to add that value here, click apply, and now you see this dimension style has an extension. The next option up is flip dimension line extension. So this is grayed out. I can't really explain anything on this because it really isn't an option. So I'm going to move on to the witness line control option. So there's 2 options here. There's gap to element, which is what is currently set, and there is fix to dimension line. Now if I were to select fix to dimension line and click apply, the witness line gets pulled back and it's fixed to this dimension line right here. So if I were to pull this dimension, you could see the witness line is not attached to the element really. I prefer to have my option set to gap to element. I believe it gives it a lot cleaner look, and if I were to pull this dimension away, my witness lines stay connected to the element that I've dimensioned to. Next up, I've got the witness line length option. Right now it's grayed out, but if I were to change the witness line control option back to fixed to dimension line, this option becomes available. Here you could set whatever length you want. Say if you want this to be 1/4 inch, click apply. You can see the witness line here is now longer. Send that back to 3/32, and you can see it changed there. This option really isn't applicable for me because I am using the gap to element option, and that grays it out. It makes this option void. Next, I've got the witness line gap to element, and what this value is this space between the element and the witness line. So right now it's set to 1/16 of an inch. If I were to change this to 1/4 inch, click apply, you can see the gap is now 1/4 inch. I'm good with 1/16 of an inch, so I'm gonna change that back and click apply. Now this option is only available because I have this witness line control option set to gap to element. If I were to change it fixed to dimension line, you could see the witness line gap to element option is grayed out. So it's only available for this gap to element setting. Now I've got this witness line extension option. It's currently set to 3/32 of an inch, and that is for this witness line extending past this dimension line. My AutoCAD styles have this set to 1/16 of an inch, so I'm going to change that, click apply, and that shortened up a bit. The next option up is the witness line tick mark. It's currently set to none. I don't use this option, but if for whatever reason you would like to use this, you have the option of the Revit tick marks here. If you select one of the tick marks, it will add a tick mark at the end of the witness line here. I don't use this option, so I'm going to set this to none. Click apply. Next up, I have Centerline Symbol, and right now it's set to none. If I select this value area drop down of the symbols that are available to use here, so I'm going to select Centerline. I'm going to click apply. You don't see a change here. Let me click OK and drag in a detail component here so we could see what this option really does. I'm going to drop in a dimension string here. So when I drop in this dimension string on this detail component, I selected the edge here, and there is a reference plane in this detail component that is labeled as the center of this detail component. So when you dimension to that, this witness line detects that it's on a center line reference plane, and that's how it knows to add this symbology to the end of this witness line. Now, there's another center option here that is the Centerline Pattern. So right now it's set to solid, and I could change that to say center quarter. I click apply, and you could see that the witness line that is detecting that is on the reference plane here of this detail component changes the pattern to whatever pattern we selected. In this case, it's a Centerline Pattern. And then there is another option for this center line, which is Centerline Tickmark. Right now it's set to default, which defaults to the original tick mark I set here. So if I change this to say an arrow 30 degree, click apply, you can see here that the tick mark that's associated with the witness line that is on the reference plane labeled as the center line changes. I don't use none of this center line options here, and let me show you why. Let me drag in another detail component that is set up incorrectly. So here's another detail component, and I'm going to do the same dimensioning here. I'm going to drop a dimension string. You can see here that this dimension string is on our TDG linear dimension style that we created. We have the centerline symbol set to centerline, we have the centerline pattern set to center 1/4, and the centerline tick mark set to 30 degrees, which is all fine and dandy in this detail component because it was constructed correctly. The one on the right over here that we just dropped this dimension string on was not constructed correctly. The reference plane that is right here in the center was not clearly identified as a center line for this detail component. And so therefore this witness line does not know that this is the center of the detail component. It doesn't activate none of the options that we've established here. And I've come across this issue a lot. I download some detail components from various websites online to, save me some time. But in the long run, it ends up costing me more time because I'm trying to figure out why this centerline option isn't working. And the reason being is because it was constructed incorrectly. So for that reason, I've stayed away from using the centerline symbol, centerline pattern, and the centerline tick mark. So I have these all set to none for the symbology. The centerline pattern, I have that set to solid, and the centerline tick mark, I have that set to default. So I click apply. And now you could see that the settings here that were working with the centerline option are now back to the default settings. So let me delete these out right here and go back to my linear dimension style options. Next option up is the interior tick mark display. Right now it's set to dynamic. The other option is always show. When we click apply, you see nothing happens, but we now have this interior tick mark option that wasn't available with the dynamic option. As you can see there, we switch it to dynamic and this interior tick mark option grays out. Going back to always show, if we change this interior tick mark option to say filled.small and click apply, here you see that these interior tick marks change to the tick mark we've selected here. Now an interior tick mark is a tick mark that occurs between the beginning and the end of the dimension string. So these are the interior tick marks. I've never used this setting for my dimension styles. I've seen others use it, but I don't use it. So I'm going to set mine to dynamic, click apply, and get it back to how I want it to look. This next option, ordinate dimension settings, it's grayed out, and I'm not sure why it's showing up under the continuous dimension string type, because it's only applicable to the ordinate string type. So as you can see here, when I switch this to ordinate, this ordinate dimension settings now becomes available. And if you click edit, you can edit the ordinate dimension settings. I don't use ordinate dimensions, and I'm not too familiar with how they all work, so I can't really go too in depth with these settings. I just know that they're there. So I'm going to set this back to continuous. This option is now grayed out. The next option up is color. If you want to change the color of your dimension styles, here's where you would do so. So here, I'm going to set this to green and click apply and OK. And you could see that the linear dimension style here is now green. The color option is for everything. It is for the lines, the witness lines, the dimension lines, the tick, and the text. Currently, Revit doesn't have the option of separating the colors from the text and the line work. So there's only one color option, and whatever color you select, that's going to be for everything in the linear dimension style. I like working in black and whites and grays, so any other color I don't work with. The final option that we have here under the graphics group is the dimension line snap distance, and that's currently set to 1/4 of an inch. Now let me show you what this option does here. I'm going to drop a new dimension string here, and as I'm pulling out, you could see that it snaps right there. Go a little bit further away and bring it back, and it will snap. And you could see that there's a light blue dashed line where the snap occurs, and that is what this dimension line snap distance is. You could change this value to be something different, to 1/2 an inch or whatever, but I'm good with 1/4 of an inch snap distance right there. And that does it for this graphics group. The next group I'm going to be going over is the other group here, where there's equality text, equality formula, and equality witness line display. This equality text option here is currently set to EQ, and to get that to show up on my dimension string, I need to select a dimension string that has multiple values. Now when I select that, this EQ with a slash appears. If I click on that EQ, the equality text now appears. If I want to change this back to the default values, I click the EQ icon again. Now if I want to change this equality text value, I'd go back into my linear dimension style settings and change it here to say equality. Click apply, and there it changes. I'm going to keep this as EQ. I'm going to hit apply. So now I have that value as EQ, but I want to show the default values back now. The next option here is equality formula, and there is a button here in the value area. If I click this dialog box appears with some dimension parameters. There is length of segment, number of segments, number of witness lines, and total length. Right now it's set to total length, and to get this to appear on this dimension string, I need to select the dimension string with multiple values, and over here in the equality display under the value column, if I were to select that, there's this drop down, and in that drop down there's a couple of options. There's value, equality text, and formula. If I select equality text, the equality text will appear here instead of the default values. It's identical actually to this EQ toggle. So if I were to toggle here, it goes back to the default values, and I click this toggle again and it goes to the equality text. And you could see that it changes here when I click this toggle. So right now it changed to value, I click it again and it goes to equality text. The third option is only available in this drop down. If I select equality formula, you see now that it's the total length as it has here in the equality formula value area. If I click this and say I want to have, say, the length of a segment instead of the total length, I select the total length over here in the label parameters area, remove it, and drop in the length of segment. I click apply, click OK, click apply, and now you see that the value here is now just the length of the segment. So these are the segments right here. So this is one segment, this is another segment, and this is another segment, and the value of each one of those segments is 6 inches. Now I'm not sure why here it says length. I guess it'd be short just for length of segment. If I were to remove this and go number of segments and bring that in, click apply here, okay, and apply. And now it says 3 as the value because there is 3 segments, 1, 2, 3. If I remove that and select number of witness lines, click apply, okay, and apply, the value here is 4 because there is 4 witness lines, 1, 2, 3, 4. Going back to here, the total length. Now I could have all of these in here if I wanted to. Drop all those in and hit apply. Click OK, apply, and you see all of that information is now there. And I could separate these with some parentheses if I do it in the prefix column and in the suffix column. Click apply, okay, apply, and you can see there that the total length value is now in parentheses. So I'm just going to remove all these here and leave it at the default of total length. I find this total length kind of redundant because if you have another dimension string on the outside that identifies the overall length of this equality string, then that's kind of redundant. So I'm going to click OK here, and I'm going to change this back to value and go back into my linear dimension styles. The final option here is equality witness display. There's a few options here. There's tick and line, tick only, and hide. If I click apply, there's no change there. Select tick only and click apply. You see that there's no change graphically there either. And if we select hide, no change there either. This option only works when the equality display is set to equality formula. So if we go back into the linear dimension style settings and we change this to tick only, you can see that the witness lines go away and only the ticks are left. The equality formula is displaying the total length. If I were to select hide and hit apply, the witness lines and the tick marks are now gone. Everything is hidden. And this kind of looks redundant. You got a full length dimension string showing the same value that this dimension string is displaying. So we could play around with this to get something really neat. So say we want to specify how many spaces there is here. So there's 1, 2, 3, and let's say a number of segments. Let's click apply here. Let's see what we could get. Click apply here, and you can see that there's 3 segments. So now let's go back into here and let's add some text here as a suffix after the value. So I'm gonna say EQ spaces. I'm gonna click OK and apply, and there we have it. 3 EQ spaces. We could even say equal spaces. Click OK, apply. And you can see here that there is no space automatically added between the value of the equality formula and the text that we added. So to get a space there, you need to manually add one. So click OK and click apply, and see there that space is added. So this is pretty cool. We could snap a dimension string line, have it equally move the elements, and then come in here and change the equality formula to work for us, and then hide the equality witness display elements to get this. So this will work out great if we have a framing plan where we want the framing members to be equally spaced. We could drop this dimension line in there and get that to work. If you want this just to display the values, you could go there and all of the settings return to normal. And that brings this tutorial to an end. Let me bring up my screenshot of the AutoCAD styles I've been trying to replicate here, and you can see that it's pretty similar to the AutoCAD styles I've got going on. Offset from origin is a little bit different because in the Revit styles there is the opaque mask, and if I bring this closer, it'll start cutting out this dimension line. The tick mark is a bit different as well, and I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial that the tick mark that I use in AutoCAD is a block. So it's a bit squared off and it's a bit shorter. In Revit, I don't have the ability to use a block for the tick mark, and the tick marks are actually preset. There isn't an option to do a custom tick mark. So this is the shortest diagonal tick mark that Revit has to offer. So that's what I'm working with there. Everything else I'm pretty happy with. I don't believe they're exactly identical, but they're very similar. So I'm happy with that. In the next tutorial of this series, I'll be configuring my angular dimension styles. If you found this tutorial helpful, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe.